Good evening. There you go. Good evening. So we are streaming this program out live. So just to help us to make it look as though we have this auditorium full, I think we want to just utilize this section for now, and we're asking everyone to come on this section and come forward, create an illusion, and then all the Barbadians will want to be here. You'll benefit because you're here. You'll get good knowledge. They'll good evening, and we want to welcome you to our parent session teaching and learning English in the 21st century. My name is Julian Burgess. I work in the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. I am responsible for the Skills for the Future program, under which a consultancy we have engaged the University of New Brunswick. They're very skilled in this area, a team of consultants out of Canada, skilled in this area, who has been doing some amazing work over the last, well, 11 months now, starting in January and coming every 3-4 months, coming back to train teachers, but we also felt it important to share some of this knowledge with parents because ultimately the students come home to you, and when you're trying to correct them, they say, my teacher didn't teach me that way. And then there's this battle that ensues. And if you're a parent like I am, you know the teacher is always right. And you're wrong as a parent when you're trying to do work with your children. So we wanted to also expose you to some of the things that we are implementing or training teachers on to ensure that you also gain the skills necessary to aid your children and to make life in the classroom wonderful for them. I want to invite now at this point Dr. Sherry Rose from the University of New Brunswick, a skilled literacy tutor, teacher, lecturer, mentor, and I can keep going on and on and on. And her team consists of David DeCoste. He's a math guru. And then we have Kim, and Kim's last name now eludes me. Kim Stewart, and Kim is into literacy and numeracy. Today they were at LSD Secondary School, and the LSD School, sorry, let me get that right. And two teachers taught students utilizing the skills that were implemented or imparted by Kim and Sherry. And you should see the reaction on the students' face. You should see the engagement. It was a wonderful experience and time. And we want to show you what we've been doing in the classroom and expose you to these skills. So I turn over now to Dr. Sherry.
Thank you, Junior. Thank you, Junior, and thank you for coming out tonight. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of engagement, and you're going to get an opportunity to ask questions. So we're thrilled to be here with you. And we're going to start right away with David doing a math activity with you.
Yes, I know that you all love mathematics. And math was, I'm sure, your favorite subject in school. So I thought that we would begin with just a very simple game that we could play with children of all ages. And the game is up here. It's called the game of 50. In the game of 50, there are two players. Player one goes and selects a number from 1 to 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And then the second player will select a number from the same set and add it to the first number. Player 1 then selects a number from 1 to 6 and adds on to the total. This continues until a player can make the exact sum of 50. That will be the winner. Can you figure out a way that you could always win this game? Now, I thought to begin, we'd actually model the game. So I see that Kim is passing out material. So if Sherry will come over here, and we'll play the game, she and I, so that you will get a sense of how this works. Sherry, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first.
She will go first. So what number would you like to pick?
6.
So Sherry picks a 6, and class, I'm going to pick a 6 too. So when I add 6 and 6, what's the total? 12. Good job. And then Sherry, what would you like to pick?
6.
She would like to pick 6. And class, what is the total of 12 and 6? 18. Okay, 18. And what would you like to pick, Sherry?
That was my pick already.
Oh, that was your pick. I will pick a 5. Class, what about 18 add 5? 23. Okay, so we're 23. And now Sherry gets her pick. And what would you like to select, Sherry?
I'm going to pick a 5 as well.
A 5 as well. She's actually thinking that if she copies my number, she's going to win. Is that a good strategy? I don't think so. But it might be. Okay, 23 add 5 would be how much, class? 28. And then I will pick a 6. And 28 add 6 is equal to 34. Now, it's time to really stop and pause and think. She could pick a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and then it's going to be turned over to me. And we're getting very close to the number 50. So we should move very carefully. We're not going to rush this because I am very competitive and I would certainly want to beat her. She's a literacy person. I'm a math person. Junior said I'm a guru, which is not true, but I'd like to win. So what would you like to pick, Sherry?
I'm going to pick a 3.
She's going to pick a 3. Okay, it's my pick. And it's a critical pick. Do you have any advice for me? What would you recommend? I'm at the point I know I can take her down. What would be a very wise choice for me? What would you pick, sir? 6? I'm going to take your advice. You look very intelligent. I'm going to take his choice, and thank you very much. 34 add 6.
37.
Oh, 37, I'm sorry. 37 add 6 would be equal to 43. Was he smart when he told me 6? Did he make a smart choice? You must be an engineer. Are you an engineer? No. Are you a mathematician? Yeah, I suspect he likes math, and that's why he's so good in it. Now, Sherry, what would you like, darling?
I don't want to pick anything because I'm going to lose.
You have no choice. Please pick.
Oh.
Come on, Sherry. Come on.
6.
6. Oh, look at that. Poor Sherry. Class, what am I going to pick? 1. Okay, I'd like you to play with your neighbor. And when you play with your neighbor, make sure you beat that neighbor. Okay, go ahead.
Good luck.
Some of you might have to move a little to find someone to play with. Who picked the 2? Oh, yeah. Okay, it's interesting to watch how you're playing. Has anyone got a strategy to win this game all the time? Yes.
I just pick 6 all the time.
Pick 6 all the time.
Yeah.
If you
Once
pick
I
6 all
start,
the time, you will win?
well, it depends on what the other person picks.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you pick 6 all the time, she thinks you will win. Does someone have a different strategy? Anyone have a different strategy? A number of you notice this pattern. If you give your opponent the number 43, can you win? Will you, if I was playing with you and I gave you a 43, will I always be the winner? Yes. Why will I always be the winner? Yeah, 6 is the highest number, and so I can make at most, I can, I can only make at most.
Let the audience use the mic so we can record.
I'm sorry?
Let the audience raise their hand.
Yeah.
And use the mic so we can record.
Okay.
Right. So you go ahead.
If I add 6, I know I can only make 49 or anything between 44 and 49. So automatically I can add the next number to get that. So a critical number is to give your opponent the number 43. Does anyone know what you should give to your opponent prior to 43? You would give her 40. She'd give you back 41. Yeah. I want you to think about, I want you to leave here and go home tonight and play with your son or daughter and see if you can figure out a way that right from the first number, you could win if you have the first choice. This is the strategy. The computation is easy here, but the reasoning behind the pattern is much more complex. So I have done this with children that are 10 years old, and they have worked on the reasoning behind the pattern. They all can play the game. And I've done it also with 15-year-olds. And it's very surprising to me that sometimes 10 and 11-year-olds will come up with a pattern and a strategy more accurately than 14, 15-year-olds. Isn't that interesting? Okay, thank you for that.
Tonight, David and I are asking you to reflect on why education is changing globally and what are the big changes and what do these changes mean for your children's learning. Do you want to talk about that?
We know that the changes are now because across all the countries in the world, for many, many years, there were very uneven standards. Some countries were doing amazing things in geometry, and other countries weren't doing practically anything. Some countries were doing great on number, but other countries were very poor when it came to number. And so, as an organization of countries, we have come together and we've looked for what's the best thing to offer our children in public school so that they're ready for mathematics beyond public school. We know that this is important because we have a lot of student mobility. There are Barbadian students in Canada studying right now. They have to compete with children or students from across the world. I was telling a parent who told me that their son was going to the University of Waterloo for engineering. And I happened to have seen the graduation list of over 400 engineers from the University of Waterloo in Canada. Do you know that there were only about 1/3 of the students that when they announced the student's name, they said, John Philip Smith, Canada, and everyone would erupt in applause. There were students from probably about 50 countries in the world that were studying at Waterloo. Waterloo goes out and looks for the top kids globally. And believe me, they're competing against schools like MIT, Stanford, schools in Germany, schools in Australia. Every country is looking for the most talented students. Because what we're having today in the world, we have a tremendous work shortage. In the coming year, Canada's going to need 750,000 new immigrants. And we're looking people to fill jobs that we as Canadians aren't ready to fill. The Americans are even in a worse situation. We also know that the jobs require very different skills. We are actually looking for, this project that we're working on is skills for the future. What do you think your children need in order to be successful in the future? I can tell you that they are very different skills from what you and I learned when we went to public school. We need skills like being able to communicate. I sometimes laugh at myself when I'm standing up here talking to you like this, because when I went to high school, I was a nerdy little kid that would be too embarrassed to stand up in front of the class because I was laughed at in my first year of high school when the teacher said, oh, does anyone have an idea? And I went and I said, my idea, and all the students in the class laughed, and I shut my mouth for the rest of high school. Most of my living has been made on writing and speaking. Do you know what I did? When I finished high school, I took a mathematics degree with physics. So I wouldn't have to speak, and I wouldn't have to write, and I wouldn't have to do any communication. Well, darn it all. I had to learn how to communicate pretty darn fast to survive. So when we go to classrooms, we want to see children reading, writing, speaking, presenting, debating, justifying their. We talked about proof with teachers in geometry, and how do you do proof? And it's not the kind of proof that you did when you went to school, where you had statements and reasons that turned out to be memorization, not understanding. So it is very different skills, very different reasoning skills. I was at a graduation of a friend of mine who was in nursing. And the dean of the School of Nursing, they had probably close to 1,000 graduates in nursing. And she said the number one skill that nurses need in the future is the ability to problem solve. Because when they go out now to hospitals, the technology is changing by the week, literally. They are having to learn and learn and learn and learn. And so we want our skill, a real skill of the future is, are you a lifelong learner? You will not stop studying your entire life for the new generation of workers that are coming, because change is constant.
I'd say another important lifelong skill is collaboration. When I went to school, we sat in individual desks. We did our work by ourselves. We didn't look left or right. And now we want children collaborating together in almost every subject. We want them building their ideas. We want them reading their work to each other. We want them challenging each other's thinking. And one of the things we know about that is that peer-to-peer learning is very powerful in a classroom when it's supported.
So when we look at changes in curriculum, and that's part of the reason why we're here, we're working with teachers to look at how should the curriculum maybe change in Barbados? Our curriculum is undergoing change constantly. Teachers used to have curriculum documents in Canada or in any European country, anywhere in the world, and these were the targets that they were expected to teach to. We now call these documents living documents, and that means that they are changing in flux constant. I was asking your secondary teachers that I'm working with on Monday, what do they think are the most important concepts to learn in geometry for their students from Form 1 to Form 5? What's the most important? What do you think kids really have to know how to do? And we started thinking about it and coming up with ideas and focusing on those. New curriculum in countries, we have many, many fewer topics or fewer targets that we're doing with kids. When you went to school, the teacher started probably at the beginning of the book and raced to the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Those were all the targets. And you felt like you were on a treadmill rushing through. Today, we are saying that quality is far better than quantity. I would rather see children do 10 targets very well than 50 targets that are very superficial. And I see teachers here who are saying, yeah. So I was saying to the teachers in measurement on Wednesday, you know that most of our kids that are leaving in Form 5 are very poor in measurement. And the reason why they're very poor in measurement is that measurement always emphasized filling in formulas. And we're saying, I don't want a single formula in the session. What did the teachers do most of that whole day that I did measurement on? They did measuring. They actually did physical measurements. And that's what we want to push.
And we're trying to align what we do in the classroom with what we would like children to be doing in their life, right? Lifelong, and in college, university, and work expectations. So if we expect people to collaborate and work, to innovate, to problem solve, to create, we want to be doing that inside the classrooms. And we want it to include very rigorous content. So we're not talking about, even though we're talking about fewer standards, we're talking about rigorous work, challenging children, teaching up to children no matter who they are and what their experiences are, and applying that knowledge through higher order skills. So we're always striving to teach up. We believe that every single child can learn, and we work beside the child to achieve it, to achieve the best we can.
And we're interested in presenting children with problems that are exciting and invigorating to children. Yes, I do want them to be able to find the volume of a right rectangular prism and the volume of a sphere and the volume of a cone and the volume of maybe a cylinder. But I also want them to know, what if I asked you, as I've done with students that are 12 and 13 years old, how many blades of grass are on the soccer field? And how are we going to find that out? That's a challenging problem for many, many adults. And it involves a lot of measurement. Certainly we're not going to count all the blades of grass on the field, but we can get a very good estimate. And the number that the students get is an exciting number, because when they look at that field, they know what 13,720,000 looks like.
I want to just talk about rigorous content and literacy. Today, Kim and I were in a classroom, and we watched an educator invite children to write poetry. And then we proceeded to conference with children from table to table about their work, which basically means we're getting the children to reread their work out loud to us, to tell us what their strategies are, to ask them, where do you need help? And it was interesting. This is the question 2 students in the class came up with. They said, it doesn't look like a poem. It looks like a paragraph. Now that is a very interesting challenge. How do you turn a paragraph into a poem? And so that's where we would start. We would build on the strength of that question that a student asked, and we would turn that into a mini lesson. What can we do with your paragraph to turn it into a poem? Well, poems have repetition. What word is interesting in your paragraph that we can repeat? What words can we cross out that you don't need in this paragraph and keep the words that carry the message? And then how do we perform that piece? And by the end of it, they were chanting the poems and clapping the poems. So it's very, very focused on what the child is trying to figure out, what is the question the child generates, and then we plan the lesson right around what they're doing. So that's very strength-based. And we know the target we're aiming for. The target we're aiming for is everybody produces a poem in the room, right? Everybody feels successful.
Yes, and we're looking at research. We're trying to bring into our sessions that we're doing with teachers, what does the latest research tell us? You know, it's very interesting that in the United States and Canada, there were millions, if not billions of dollars that have been invested in technology, and I'm talking about electronic technology, in the last 10 to 20 years. We went on a rampage in Canada to put in smart boards, to put in computers, to buy tablets, to buy a lot of technology. And now, in the past decade, or even more, we started looking and saying, is it making a difference? Is all the technology and all the spending, is there a good payoff? And we have seen things that are very promising, but we have seen many things that have been utter waste of money. We rushed in like fools, thinking that this was going to solve everything. We work with teachers and we say, there are websites which are amazing. There are websites which are garbage. We actually are looking at the effect of technology upon academic achievement. So we have control groups. We have classrooms that are full of technology, and we have classrooms that have little technology. And we start asking, at the end of a year or 2 years, who has made the greatest progress? And I know a lot of it has been done in mathematics, but also in other subjects that we're interested, of course, in having children study. So when we come and we share technology with the teachers here, we find that there are some schools that have lots of technology in Barbados and some that have not so great technology. And what we have to view technology, we've come to the conclusion, viewing technology is all about how we can best use it as a tool. What would make a difference? What is the best software? What are the best locations to go to?
We're also trying to bring in the very best of the research in both math and literacy, and we're trying to really focus on what are very fair assessment practices. We know that the way we assess children has a huge impact on how motivated they are in the classroom. And so we're really doing a lot of modeling of formative assessment, this kind of information you gather every day to feed back to the child. What are you doing well? Where am I going to take you next? Where do you want help? And the child is a key player in that. And so we know that we have to be very careful to be very fair in how we assess children.
Yes, and it's interesting because I know you have high stakes tests in Barbados, and some of you might love those tests, and some of you may hate those tests. In Canada, we do still have national and provincial testing. And we have tests that assess the program to see how the program's working. And we also have tests that would give a standard sense across a grade level. We are, by law, only permitted to count 20% of an assessment towards a child's mark for a given year. So our senior students that write their highest level of mathematics and calculus would only get a mark from the province on that major exam out of 20. The rest would come from in-school assessment. We are also very careful, and I'm not saying we're doing everything perfect in Canada, but we are working very, very hard to promote equity in our school system. We're very fearful of the achievement gap. The achievement gap is the distance between the highest average achieving students and the lowest achieving students in your school system. Can you guess which country has the biggest achievement gap in the world? I think I read your lips. The United States of America. The achievement of the top students compared to as a group, compared to the bottom students, is the largest in the world. And we worry about that. And what we are doing in Canada is lifting up the students who have the greatest difficulty and narrowing that achievement gap. Because we know that if we don't narrow the achievement gap between the lowest and the top, we are going to have serious social problems in our country. Think of the frustration of being at the very bottom or being told you're at the very bottom.
We know that it's very important for children to learn through constructing their own meaning making. So they need lots of experiences and varied experiences in classrooms to try and construct their understanding. We know that simply correcting children is not teaching. You can, I mean, even if you try to tell an adult something they don't believe, until they learn to believe it themselves, they will not hear you. So we know that it's very important that we pay attention to what opportunities are we giving children to construct their understanding of concepts, and that they need to many opportunities to explore concepts instead of in order to make sense of them, and that's why we're looking at fewer targets in our curriculum. And we know that children need to represent their learning in multiple ways. So we know that to be a strong communicator, you can represent your learning graphically, through words, through performance, through acting, through singing. There's a wide range of ways that we communicate, so we're working towards that as well in all subjects. And we know that social interaction is critical to learning. We learn best from our peers. Research in assessment, international research in assessment, actually says that children learn very powerfully during small group discussions around their work because their peers are not grading them. And I overheard kids today who were saying, "Are you going to ask a question?" "No, I'm not going to ask that question." But they will ask the question of each other. And when it came time to children to present their work in front of their peers, I heard peers turn around and say, "We need to hear your poem," right? So the teacher might not be aware of what that poem was about, but the other child had already exchanged the sheet of paper and heard it and said, "We need to hear your poem." And the teacher said to Kim and I, some of the kids got up for the first time today to share their own writing. So it's very powerful peer communication.
Yeah, perhaps one of the greatest influences in education today is coming from the medical community. We now have education working with medical researchers called neuroscientists and looking at how people do learn. CAT scans and MRIs are revealing some very exciting information about what is happening within our heads as we learn. Today I was at a primary school and I asked the teachers what the challenges were. And they said to me something that I hear very common. Well, when we teach the multiplication facts, they all know them in June of the year I taught them. But then in September, they don't know anything. It fell out of their head over the summer. I'll tell you that research would tell us that it fell out of their head the same way that we clean our brain every night. Do you know that when you go to sleep tonight, much of what you heard today will be lost? Because your short-term memory is cleared every evening while you sleep. The brain is very powerful. Similarly for children, they learn their multiplication facts, and it tended to be learned by drill and pounding it into them. That's the way I learned them. Now it's stuck because somehow I was able to make the connections. The neurologists and the neuroscientists tell us that we can take things which are in the frontal lobe of where the short-term memory is, and we can move them into long-term memory by making connections between facts. So when teaching the multiplication facts now, we have research to tell us how to do it. And we know that if we follow the research, we're going to have just about every kid successful at remembering their facts. And it's making connections through different representations that Sherry was talking about. So we want them to do the multiplication facts concretely, and we were doing that today. Yeah, for example, the most difficult multiplication fact is 7 times 7. That is the hardest fact to learn. It's the weirdest one. If the child knows 5 times 7 and 2 times 7, do they know 7 times 7? Okay, they do, because 5 times 7 and 2 times 7, the sum of the two give you 7 times 7. If I know 2 times 7, do I know 4 times 7? Yeah, 2 sevens are 14, 4 sevens are double, 28. If I double 28, I get 56, which is doubling 4, and it's 8 times 7. If you know 8 times 7 is 56, do you know 7 times 7? Yeah, because it's 1 less than 8 times 7. We want the children to have all these relational understandings of number. But in addition, I've been in classrooms where the children this week are studying their 5 timetable or their 6 timetable, and the teacher will say, okay, it's time to create some rap songs or some music. And we're going to create songs about 6 times 7, or the 6 times table. And you'll hear the kids writing up their songs, which is poetry in action, and then getting up and starting to go right to it and sing out the song. I'd sing it for you, but I'm afraid that they'd want to sign me up to sing with Rihanna. So I won't do that. I will tell you that we really need to get the kids to be able to move the facts from short-term into long-term memory.
Research also tells us that critical to teaching and learning is efficacy, the belief that one can learn with a little bit of effort. So for children, if they believe that they can learn with a little bit of effort, they'll put the effort in and they'll succeed. For teachers, if they believe in the child and in their capacity to change a child's life, this is critically important. A fixed mindset, Carol Dweck writes about this, she's researched this, a fixed mindset says, I'm not good in math, I'm not a good reader. A fixed mindset shuts down motivation and shuts down learning. So when children say, I'm not good at this, we say, not yet. And we make it clear to the children that they're our project and we're going to help them get there. When I was in school, the child sat here, the teacher was here with the curriculum. Now we're asking teachers to be beside the child and figure out how are we going to be successful at that curriculum. So we want all students and all adults to have a growth mindset, to believe that we are smarter because we experience more and more and more. And the more we experience, the more we grow our intelligence.
And this growth mindset tells us that all of us, every one of us in this room, we're not necessarily all the same in terms of our thinking all the time. And in fact, when you look at a child's thinking, the graph would look something like this.
Yeah.
This is the focus and thinking of a young man, and it's going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Think about if I ask that child a question on this day. How is that child going to respond? Not the best. But if I ask that child on this particular day, I'm going to get a very good response. So time, it's very interesting how time can change, how well you do on a particular assessment.
I'm going to pick up the time thing with the next point. It's really important that we give children time to struggle. Kim and I were teaching a literacy class this year. We gave the students, the university students, in their 5th year of university, a challenging literacy article to read. And they came in quite angry, and they were quite outspoken about their anger. This was very hard material. And I said, good, it's my job to challenge you. You're paying for an education. And they said, could you give us a summary? And I said, no, I'm not giving you a summary. Let's dig in. So somewhere along the line in their education path, they learned that reading should be easy. And we need to be honest about it. It's hard work. Writing is hard work. Thinking is hard work. And we need to let them struggle, but struggle with support in a community that honors their work.
Okay, I'd like to ask you, and I'm giving you questions, by the way, that I used today with primary teachers. I'd like to ask you, how would you do the question 396 subtract 198? Anyone want to talk about how they do it? Here we go.
I changed the first one to 398, then subtract and get 200, and then I subtract 2 from that and get 198.
Okay, she changed the 396 subtract 198. She changed it to 200.
No, I changed the 396 to 398. So I added 2. So it would make it.
Oh, she added 2. Oh, to 396. And then she?
So I subtract 198 from 398 and get 200.
Oh, I see what you did. You made that 398, and then you subtracted 198, and then you got 200. And then you took off, and then she took off the 2 that she added, so she got an answer of 198. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did anyone do it differently?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Right. 198, add on 2, you get 200.
Mm-hmm.
And subtract 200 from 396, you get 196.
Okay, you get 196.
Right, and then you would have made it 198 2 more. Right, so.
Yeah, why did you add 2 more?
Because, sorry?
Yeah, do you tell me go 196, add 2 more?
Yeah. No. Yes, I do. Right.
Yeah.
To get 198.
And I asked you, why did you add the 2 more?
Right. Because it's easy to see 200 from 396.
Okay.
Right.
So you made it simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he got 198. Did anyone else do it differently? We might have a child who would go like this.
Wait, there's somebody?
Okay, here we go.
Yes, just add 2 to both of them.
Just add 2 to both of them. So we get 398, take away 198. Or take away 200, right. And you
Right,
get
and
the
then
answer.
subtract.
And then subtract. Is that the way you did subtraction when you went to school? No. I have a feeling that when you went to school, you did this. You said 396, take away 198, and you lined them up, and then you borrowed and caught, right? When you did it that way, and you said, oh, I'm going to make this 16 and make this an 8, and then I'm going to have 16 take away 8 is 8, then I have to make this 18, make that a 2, 18 take away 9 is 9, and 2 take away 1 is 1. When you did it that way, you were following a procedure that probably the teacher taught you. And what the focus was on was the digits involved in the number. When in fact, Carrie said to add 2 to each is a very common strategy. So let me just show you what she did visually. On a number line, if I put on the number 396, where would I put the number 198? To the left or to the right? To the left. So I'm going to put on my number line 198. We do a lot of work now on a thing called the open number line. It was, in fact, first advanced by the Dutch. And then we stole it from the Dutch and brought it to Canada and said, we're using the open number line because it's such a powerful tool. And what Carrie did was she said, in order to make this, in order to find the difference, I want to find out how far apart are those two numbers. Isn't that what a difference is? How much greater is one compared to another? How far apart are the two? So if I add 2 on here, I get to 200. I should also add on 2 here to get to 398 in order to maintain the same distance that I have above, right? So subtraction can be done simply by adding or subtracting a certain amount to make a friendly number. The question is, here I'm focused on the total number and place value. Why would we ever teach the children that? It was a rule that made no sense or actually ruined place value for most children. Now, some children, by the way, who start doing subtraction will also do this. They'll say, 198, if you add 2, that brings you to 200. Then if you add 100, now you're up to 200, 202. And then if you add 96, you get 298. And we can treat subtraction as if adding on. Is that a good strategy? It's a very good strategy because if you ever go out for a drink at a bar and the bartender comes around, that's how he or she will subtract. So if I had 52 subtract 39, probably the easiest way to do that question would be either to change that 39 to a what?
40.
40. And now I'd have 53 take away 40, which is an easy question, right? Or if I'd like to use the bartender, cashier, the person with the cash, like a taxi cab driver or someone, I could add 1, get to 40, and then I'd add 12, so the answer is 13. This is the kind of work that now we're doing with children. We know that mental math and estimation is very, very important in the real world. In research that was done in the real world, more than 90% of the computation that was done by people without using a calculator. If they were not using a calculator, they did it by mental math or estimation. Very, very seldom does anyone take out a piece of paper and say, oh, I'm going to catch and borrow. No carpenter would do that. No one is really, they're all doing it mentally. If you look at the next problem, 304 take away, 762 take away 304, what would be a friendly number to change 304 to? 300. So you dropped it down 4, and I could drop this down 4 by dropping 2 and dropping 2 to get 758. 758 take away 300 is a very simple problem, isn't it? I am convinced that if we start introducing subtraction as adding on and subtracting a friendly number, all of our children in Barbados will have 100% in subtraction. But if we continue to line up the ones, line up the tens, line up the hundreds, and do trade and borrow or whatever we're doing, we're still going to have kids confused and mess up. And when we've been working here in math, we have been working with the teachers on all the strategies that have come forth. And this is happening in every country in the world. Australia took 3 years focused on developing mental math for our students. Germany and Holland developed a lot of strategies. We are giving away the old procedures that came from the Europeans when they landed in our countries. You know, today we were talking about this with the teachers, and they were saying, wow, this is really easy. Think how easy it would be to have 78 subtract 69. I would add on. I'd say add 1, add 8, that's 9. Some of the kids like to go 79 take away 70, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So we're really focusing on specific cognitive practices in the classroom in all subject areas. As we've talked about tonight, communication, helping children make connections, connections to what they read, connections to what they view, connections in math, connections to the world they live in, problem solving, allowing them to struggle individually first, and then allowing them to talk with small groups around them about their struggle and learn from their peers, learn new ideas, and then present their problem solving in front of the class and then defend their problem solving to their peers and be able to answer questions.
Yeah, and if I could interrupt about problem solving. Problem solving is sometimes fun problems that are contrived, like, well, counting the grass on the soccer field is not, it's a real problem. But for example, Friday, I'm working with the secondary teachers on data and probability. And one of the problems that we're going to take a look at is medical testing. And I'd want them to go back and work on this with their students. And we present a problem where you go to your doctor, you're not feeling so good. And the doctor says, oh, I'm going to send you for blood tests. And then the doctor calls you, which you hate that call, and says, I want to see you. And you go into the doctor's office and the doctor says, the blood test revealed that you are positive for a certain disease. The question should be, how concerned are you that you actually have the disease? By the way, we do a lot of mathematical modeling in physics and in mathematics, and we do this problem through mathematical modeling. And we start working with the kids through a very visual model about the reliability of medical testing. Most of the public, if that happened to us, we'd run home and say, oh my God, I have to prepare my final resting place, right? But how reliable is that information? And that's a real problem that we'll be addressing, and that I'd ask the teachers to address with 13 and 14-year-olds. Because in their life, they're likely to have medical testing at some point. So look at this problem, and I thought that I'd address the rule business again. Without using the rule, you know, the one that came down from heaven, and God sent us the rule of dividing fractions. Remember it? God said, if you just change division to multiplication and you flip and you multiply, it all works out, so don't think. Don't think about anything, just follow my advice, and you will get the answer. And for most of us, when we went through school, we followed what our teacher told us to do, and we got the answer. I used to say, yours is not to question why, yours is just to do or die. But I would like you to think about these problems without using the rule. This question is really asking, how many 2/10 are in 8/10? Does anyone know the answer? 4. You are a smart group. And you didn't flip and multiply, did you? How many 1/5 are in 4/5? 4. 1/5, 1/5, 1/5, 1/5, that's 4/5, right? What? You're not seeing it. I need concrete material, but I didn't bring it, Junior. Junior's going to come after me. I know him. Yeah. How about 15/16?
5.
You have 5 3/16, don't you? Do you all agree? If you had 18 twentieths, how many 9 twentieths do you have? 2. And of course, here's the real question, which I'm expecting Mr. Burgess to answer, so you can all be quiet, class. If I had 72 499ths and I want to divide by 8 499ths, what is the answer, Mr. Burgess?
9.
9. See how well he did? Give him an applause. And so he's correct in all of that. And then, now then, I'd say to the students, let's take a look at these problems. If I had 8/10 divided by 1/5, that makes it more difficult. What could I do to make it a simpler division? Yeah? Make that 1/5 2/10, right? So how many 2/10 and 8/10? 4. I had 9/12 divided by 1/4. What would you change that 1/4 to? 3/12, right? How many 3/12 and 9/12? 3. I have 20 30ths, and I want to divide by 1/6. What should I change this to? 5 30ths. How many 5 30ths are there in 20 30ths? 4. And then we come to the crown jewel. I have 1/2 divided by 1/3. What would you change it to? 6's. Great. Because when you divide, you don't want to divide apples and oranges. You have to divide apples by apples or oranges by oranges, right? And that's true in fractions. You have to divide here 6 by 6. How many 1/2 is how many 6? 3. So you have 3/6. 3/6 divided by how many 6? 2/6. So how many 2/6 are there in 3/6? If each one of my fingers represents 1/6, I have 3 of them. How many groups of 2/6 do I have? 1.5 of a 2/6. You didn't have to flip. You used your brain and reasoned it out. And yes, Junior is correct. If we were with a group of students, we have concrete material to do it concretely first. And when you do this with the children, they tell you this. In order to divide 2 fractions, sir, you must find a common denominator and divide the numerators. It makes sense to them. They understand what they're doing. They're not following a rule that just happened to land on them. The focus of mathematics is really for children to learn through problem solving. Here's a problem that I would like you to try. Do you know the Agape? We love this company. The Agape Chocolate Company. Do you know that company? You don't know that company? They're in Barbados. They make chocolate and it's delicious. The Agape Chocolate Company, I want you to look up here, is making a special Christmas box of chocolates. And the box of chocolates is going to hold 2 dozen chocolates. 2 dozen chocolates. And the company says this box will be wrapped in a very special gold-colored paper. I want to know, what shape of a box would you make if you were the company that would really sell the product? And you have Cubal ink in your hand, so how many cubes are you going to need? How many cubes are you going to need? 24, right. You'll need 24 cubes to make a box out of them, right? once you have a box of chocolates made, would you give it to either Kim or Sherry, and they'll hold it up, and we want to see how many different boxes are going to be presented. Have you got one made? Oh, she's doing all the work. Every man has a good woman that does all the work. Yeah, oh, you're just thinking. Oh, you're the consultant. That's my job, too. Because they probably won't. So I have one box of chocolates that will look like this. This box of chocolates is a 2 high, 3 wide, and 4. The dimensions of the box is 2 by 3 by 4. Would you like to have a box of chocolates that look like that? One student, by the way, when we did this problem said, here's the way I think they should do it. So Sherry, hold that up for them. They said, do it 1 by 1 by 24. And when I said to the girl, why are you doing it 1 by 1 by 24? It looks like a lot more chocolate. It will mark it really well. Now, which would you, if you were going to the store and this was 20 bucks, which one would you grab? Would you take this one that's rather neat? Or would you take that one? Yeah. Can you figure out why? I don't know if you know Toblerone bars. Why do they make the Toblerone bar a long, long, long bar? It looks like it's going on forever. It attracts you because of the fact that, wow, it looks big. Kim has some over on the other side, which are very similar to what I have. Kim's are very similar to what I have here, 2 by 3 by 4, both of them. And here's a new one, which has dimensions.
1 by 3 by, I'm counting them, 2, 4. 1 by 3 by 8.
1 by 3 by 8. And actually, this, I would like this box of chocolates. I think this is, you did that? I think it's you made a very smart box of chocolates. Because that looks good. This one looks more than this one, right? Okay. And here's another one, which is 2 by 2 by 6. And there's another 2 by 2 by 6. What are we doing here? What do all of these, here's another one, which is 1 by 4 by 6. Oh, I wonder, which do you think would sell better? This one or that one? I would say this one would sell better because it looks longer, looks bigger. Now, as we hold them up here, Sherry and I, what is true, what is common to all these boxes? What do they all have in common? They all have what? They all have 24 chocolates in them, right? That is called the volume of the rectangular prism. What is different between all the boxes? The amount of gold paper I'm going to need to cover these things. If Agape wants to keep the cost down and use the minimum amount of gold paper, which one do you think they should use? That one? Or maybe there's one that Kim has. Same thing? Yeah. Okay, it would appear to be this one, right? This is how we would develop the concept of volume and surface area of a right rectangular prism with children. How did you learn it when you went to school? The teacher probably told you that the volume is LWH and the surface area is 2LW plus 2WH plus 2 blah, 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 blah. And you took the formula and you could just stab it in and hope for the best. What we're saying is get rid of all the rules and procedures and allow children to explore and come up with the concept. So they develop deep understanding of what surface and volume is. You know, I was asking a group of kids, can you explain to me what is the difference between, I was asking a group of students here in Barbados, what's the difference between 1 meter, 1 square meter, and 1 cubic meter? And I had a student say, a meter is about this long, and a square meter is twice that length. It's like 2 of them. The child has no understanding of area and volume. It's a very complex process. I had another student who said, a cubic meter has to be 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. And I said, is that true all the time? Does it have to be 1 by 1 by 1 to be a cubic meter? And they said, well, does it have to be? Aren't you going to tell me? They want instant gratification, right? I said, no, no, go away and think about it. And if you have an idea, come back and tell me. I want the kids to struggle with the idea and to really stop and persevere and think. And sure enough, that kid came back and said, oh yeah, there are lots of them that we can make. Yeah. So in terms of what can parents do, we're going to do follow up with this with a story, by the way. But I would say that to help them see that math and literacy they are learning is all around us. You have so much geometry in Barbados. It's unbelievable. On Monday when I had the teachers, I showed them some slides of Barbados and said, where's the geometry? I showed them flowers. I showed them pottery. I showed them architecture. When you drive down the street here, when we drive down the street, look up. Look up at the geometry. Unbelievable. What are those shapes that are up there? Yeah, they're all hexagons, aren't they? Yeah. There are all kinds of things up there. When you look at the pottery, there's a shop there these ladies are going to go to and spend all their money called Earthworks. And then they go in line. Before they even get there, they're online looking at the images. And they say, oh my gosh, look at that, look at that. The artists who made this are all into geometry and mathematics. When you look at nature, and you have beautiful nature all around you, the flowers are geometric. The symmetry is unbelievable. So we want the children to see that math is all around them, but literacy is also all around them. Sherry, would you like to comment on that?
We know that we want to offer the children as many texts to interact with as possible. And so we use text in the broadest sense. So we were in a school this week where children were invited to create poems with a range of texts. Some children had newspaper articles, some children had images, some children had text. So we want children responding to text everywhere in their lives and to be creating a range of different texts.
Mm-hmm. And we know that it's critical to encourage your children by telling them you can do it. If only you put effort and perseverance in, you're going to do very well. When it really comes down to us, everyone in this room, we're almost all equal in intelligence. Some people work harder than me. Some people do not work as hard as me. And your success is really based upon how dedicated you are to the job that you have to do, including your learning.
We want children to be confident risk takers too, to try out their ideas. That means we're changing the classroom climate considerably. That means approximations and mistakes are absolutely fine when you're learning. So we're really trying to, one of the strategies we're using is when a child is presented their work in the front of the class, and if they make an error, we say to the children, don't correct them, ask a question. Because children and adults can be very quick to correct. And remember I said correcting is not teaching. But formulating a question that pushes that child to think and find their own errors and solve their own errors is more engaging for both the children watching and the child doing the work. And so we're really trying to change the culture of the classroom for risk-taking.
And you should be asking them regularly, what are you learning? I have 2 children, and when they'd come home from school, I'd say to them, what did you learn in school today? Nothing. I said, you learned something. Come on now. And then I said, I'm going to keep at you until you tell me at least one thing that you learned in school today. It doesn't matter what subject it's in, but tell me one thing you learned. We also want to ask them, we also want to ask you to never tell your, your children comments like, I was no good in math, or
You can't read that book, or I was never a reader.
you know, some people think it's okay to say, I was never good in math. You were good in math if you were given the opportunity to be good in math. Many, many kids are not good in math because they've had a negative experience. And if you say to your child, oh, I was never good in math, you're giving them the license to do nothing in math.
And we know that parents know their children best. Parents know their children best, so it's really important to keep close contact with educators. You are your child's spokesperson, so you know your child the best. So we know that when parents maintain close contact with educators, children do better. Children succeed better.
So in the area of literacy, as we've been working with teachers as well. And one thing that through this project that we want to do is we want to provide professional resources for teachers. And this resource here was given to every teacher in this project. And it was just published this year. It's written by Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle, and it's 180 days. And this research is done by teachers in classrooms. And it's a collaborative research across Canada and the United States. And within this book, one of the primary messages to teachers is that the number one indicator for increasing reading achievement is the amount of time that children and students are given inside school to read. And by read, we don't mean reading worksheets, we mean reading books. And in order for children to read books, they have to have access to them. So, this book here that we've just passed out, the title is Crown. The author of the book is Derek Barnes, and the illustrator is Gordon James. And whenever we introduce a book, we are also sharing the authors and illustrators, because we want students to understand and to learn about authors, because then they become interested in a certain author's style and they want to read more of that author. We would also use this book with writing. But what we'd like you to do right now is this book is meant to be read out loud because it's very poetic. What we want to do is we want you to share the books with your neighbors, and we want to hear you read the book out loud and enjoy the book with people beside you. So cluster around, and we should be able to hear you reading.
Use your mic. I just.
Oh, no.
No.
You keep reading the whole thing. Oh God. There you go. Oh.
You liking it?
Stop it.
No, no.
I'm enjoying watching you read. Yeah, okay. Keep it close. Okay, I will. Thank you. Yes. What do you think? Isn't it incredible? Incredible. Yes, yes. So every teacher was also given a copy of this book as well to take back to their classrooms. Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
If you've finished, we'd like you to consider what was your favorite line, favorite page, or a connection that you made to that book.
The different, yeah, the different versions of descriptions and expressions from just that one haircut that you, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Connections, favorite lines, favorite page.
Um, I think the book really captures all of the emotions and feelings a young man has when he goes in the barber shop, in the chair, and leaves. Um, it's like you transform then. You're a different person after you leave the barber shop. You got your lines, you got your waves, and I really like it. I think something about Mercury it is. Something like waves like Saturn. Waves like the Atlantic. Yeah, that was really good. Um, yeah, I think, and then also I must say the whoever did the pictures did a top class job. I mean, they really capture the styles, the looks on the person's faces, everything. Really good.
Again, so many connections to that text. And in schools, this is what we want for the children, for our readers. We want them being able to identify with the text they're reading and bring their prior knowledge to the table, to the book. Who else has anybody else would like to share?
Good night. When they spoke about the mother, when they appreciate that they're somewhat important, that's a very important part in life. Because a lot of people, like, when parents get frustrated, they mostly tell the children the most negative things, you know? So that was a very important part of it, to let the child know that he's special, you know?
A couple of the teachers drew on that page as well and spoke to how important that was for them as well. Yes, yeah. So, anybody else like to share before?
I guess the positivity in the book from beginning to end is what, and if a child is reading the book and they have low self-esteem, I think by the end of that book they should have a better view on themselves. I think it's really encouraging for building the person's self-worth and stuff like that.
So one of the teachers, when we used this text, what we did is we went into the text the first day and did exactly what you were doing and looking at where the connections were. On Wednesday, we went back into the same text, used the text for how would you teach reading or how would you teach writing? And exactly what you just said about to promote positive self-image, that would be one way and to do that. We also looked at the rhythm in the book. We looked at the patterns in the book. And then one of the other teachers said, look at the way he uses punctuation in the book. And then somebody else said, look at the way the spacing. It's not conventional. So we want children to turn to writers and to publish books to see how do real writers compose? What do? They don't always start at the same spot on the page. And just like today in the classroom we were in, where they were doing poetry, or they were asked to make a poem, those children used the language of, it was a Macbeth piece, but they brought their own dialect to it, and they put their own rhythm to the poetry. And the minute one student started to be able to tap her hands, and she worked at that until she got the rhythm of the language right for her in the group. So we want children composing, we want them drawing. In another group we had today, instead of, the teacher said, you can either draw or you can write. The children that went straight to the writing, the details that they had in that writing, in their drawing, they went eventually to writing, some of them, because of that practice they had through drawing. And within those pieces, we saw themselves in that writing. So we don't want them just writing and telling back facts or telling what's already written. We want a piece of them to be there. We want them to be composers and to make meaning out of what they see, read, and hear.
One of the things Kim and I were doing while you were reading is we were making notes. And that's what we want educators to do. We want educators to observe and learn what's happening for some learners in the room. I saw one young man trace the lines in the air. I heard somebody perform that girl line in a way that I could never, ever do it. I actually saw someone dancing in their chair to the rhythm of the poem. And I would make note of that as a teacher and plan for an event for that person to be performing. I also saw two people reading the note from the author at the back of the book, a really critical part to read with children, because those notes from the author teach children where writers get their ideas and teach children how to find ideas in their own life to write about.
And as I watched and looked around, it took a while for you to get into the book because you weren't quite comfortable, perhaps, I'm not sure, with this read aloud business. You had to get comfortable with the book, but as you got into the first or second page, probably by the second or third page, there were smiles. And you could almost watch it go through the group as you got farther and farther into the book. That tells us as educators that you're enjoying what you're reading. And again, research, engagement, enjoyment, and interest. You were into that book. Your body language told us. I also heard your culture. And I heard the celebration of your culture. And there would be no greater gift to give to children than that. I saw you talking to your neighbors. And the last thing I noticed is, as we were going through and sharing your favorite lines, I saw someone with the book cover on their lap, like this, touching the words. Because the words in this book are enlarged, or what do you call it, three-dimensional. But it's also telling me that there's a fondness for the book.
That's it. We thank you for coming tonight, and we thank you for thinking and reading and calculating with us tonight. We hope you've enjoyed it. Do you have any questions? The availability of the book.
The book, you can purchase it on Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's back ordered. Well, we the last time before we came, we had ordered quite a few of them. But they always get more. So, and as you can tell, it's won many awards.
In regard to the format of adaptation of learning, how close is this with the Finland model?
With the Finland model.
The Finland model is a very interesting model of education, and it was highlighted by using a lot of concrete materials. And they also have some very interesting things that are happening in terms of how teachers follow children. And Sherry, you've done...
Yeah, I've had the experience most of my career to work in classrooms where I could teach children either across 3 years, or I could teach a multi-age classroom. A multi-age classroom is when I had 3 grades in one room. If you ask me, did I love it? I absolutely love both those experiences. Because when you looked at the map of how learning goes, how the child's mind goes that David showed earlier, that's also how the learning path goes. So when you stay with students for 3 years, you get to witness a lot of growth because you are witnessing it across time. In our Canadian system, when we allow, or North American system, when we allow teachers to only have children for 1 year, there is an ugliness to that, and I'm going to be very honest here, that I'm going to survive the year. And it's not only with teachers. I once got a phone call from a parent. I picked up the phone in the principal's office, and she said to me, "Oh no, not you again." And I said to her, "Pardon me? What do you mean?" And she said, "I thought I would be done with you at the end of June." And I said, "Really?" Okay, imagine how I felt inside. I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "You expect way too much out of my son." And I said, "I don't think so. What is the problem?" And she said, "Every time he comes home with his homework, it's a battle. And I'm fighting with him at the table. I'm a single mom raising 3 boys, and I can't keep doing this." I said, "Give me your son for 2 weeks after school." "What are you going to do to him?" I said, "I'm not going to do anything. He's going to sit at his desk and do his homework before he goes home." And for 2 weeks he did it, and we never had another problem. And I didn't do his homework.
It's very interesting that you ask about the Finland education system. And he's asking, I'm sure, the question because Finland has been recognized as one of the top systems in the world by a number of people. Finland has very unique circumstances, by the way. Finland, first of all, has a very, very low achievement gap. The gap between the rich and the poor in Finland is very narrow. The result, by the way, because Finland for years, at one time in Canada, we used to have in our high schools, for example, we would take the kids and we'd have, within the same building, we would have top kids, middle kids, bottom kids. In Finland, they never did that. All the children were mixed together. They found out that by mixing all the children together, you brought those children that were came from less fortunate circumstance up. And as a result, their whole society went up. In Canada now, up to the age of 15, children are all mixed together. We have no classes in Canada that are just low, middle, high. Within one classroom, you would have gifted children, and you would have children that needed extra support. But the power of having that in a classroom for a teacher is enormous. And because if you are the gifted child, and you are the child that needs a lot of support, and you're in my classroom, I can say to you, "Would you help me?" And she's going to give you extra help. And that boosts everyone because we know that children learn more from each other than they do from the teacher to the student. Yeah. So Finland is a great example. And their math curriculum, I've looked at the Finnish math curriculum, much narrower even than Canada. Like we have reduced our math curriculum by 50% in Canada. We know that they don't have to do half of what they were doing. And they are still very successful at university. Very successful. And then I looked at Finland and I said, "Oh my Lord, they've even taken half of what we're doing." But they're digging very deep into it. They're focused on problem solving and thinking, not on repetition and memorization. Any other questions? I'm sorry?
In Singapore, is it the same?
Singapore is, I would not look personally, I would not look at Singapore as an example. I've been to Singapore. Singapore is a small kingdom, or I shouldn't maybe say kingdom, I'm not sure if it's a kingdom. It's a very small country, and Singapore is extremely wealthy as a country. Very small, very self-contained, very regimented. Singapore, what Singapore does in their education system would never work in Canada because we're far too diverse. Singapore is very homogenous, very, very regimented. And yes, they're doing nice things in mathematics. They have Singapore math that's been very successful. But when we've taken Singapore math, for example, into Canada, we've had to make major adjustments with what we're doing with it. And any other questions? Yes, sir. Oh.
Sorry. Can you say, I don't know if you can say off the top of your head or direct us to where we can find documented methods, like what we did tonight, documented methods of where you can teach math and things like that.
You've all heard the question. On the web, there are some extremely good sites that you can go to for problems. For example, there's if you can remember this word and Google it when you go home, Illuminations. Illuminations is a project that was sponsored by Duke Energy in the US. They gave millions and millions of dollars to create problems. And you can go onto that site and you get problems all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade. Several billionaires in the United States wanted to improve offerings of lessons in math and in English and in other subjects, and they brought together people in New York State and from outside of New York State, and they created a site called Engage New York, which is a very powerful site. I think sometimes, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, there's also a site out of the UK, out of Nottingham in the UK, which is called, I believe, the MAP site, the MAP site. And what they have done is they've looked at very rich problems. If you go home and you Google rich mathematical tasks, you'll find some incredible challenges for children. At some point, I could send to Junior all kinds of sites. Okay?
And what you can always do is just keep checking the MRD website, Media Resource Department website. Just Google it, because whatever resources we get, we'll post them to that website.
How about dealing with kids with dyslexia?
What would I do for dyslexia?
Dyslexia.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you want to comment? Or would you like me to comment? Okay. Dyslexia, there are many forms of dyslexia, right? There are many degrees of dyslexia. We can think of it as being on a continuum. I swear I have mild dyslexia many days. Other days I'm better. We have to be very careful that if we're labeling a child with any disability, whether it be dyslexia, I'm not suggesting in your case you're doing this, but I just want to put out a caution that sometimes we label a child as being, oh, I think they might have autism, or I think they might have dyslexia, or I think they might have dyscalculia. I hear that a lot. We must make sure that we have very professional advice and a series of tests to verify that before we actually tell any child that you have a disability. I can give you an example. When my daughter was in grade 1 or grade 2, a note came home from the school and said, your daughter has a serious speech impediment and she's going to have to be pulled out of class regularly for speech therapy. Now, I have an older sister who I wouldn't admit to her, but she is wiser than I am, much wiser. And I called her and I said, Catherine, Nicole has to go to speech therapy. She has a speech impediment. And my older sister, who was a teacher, said, forget it, you do too. She inherited your speech defect. So I said, I didn't realize I had one. Oh yeah, she said, S's are a problem for you. We've known that forever. She said, but we didn't want to tell you because you can be successful. So I refused the school to pull my daughter out. I listened to my sister. She never left the classroom, and my sister said, take the dictionary, and every night for about 2 minutes, do about 10 words that begin with S. I won't try them because I might slur them here. Okay, so we did that, but to wrap it up, my daughter ended up winning drama awards for theater when she was in high school and university. What if I had listened? So dyslexia, I wouldn't want to give any advice until we really, really knew what it was about. I am very sorry that we have to wrap things up. Was there one question left?
You said something about giving children time to struggle, giving children time to think about practicality of that in the classroom. Sometimes you only have like a 40-minute lesson. Sometimes you may have 80 minutes. I know the benefits of it, but how can you navigate through the restraints of time?
Time is always a struggle. It's true. Time is a struggle in schools, and we have looked at expanding our classroom periods. So, for example, we changed our schedules so that we would have longer chunks of time for children to focus longer. We did a lot of research on exactly how many minutes were children actually allowed to focus. Not how many minutes were they focusing, but how many minutes were they able to focus when we look at interruptions in schools. And we've done a lot of work to try and lengthen the schedules so that we can have longer periods of time for children to work through.
Also, that work is not done and finished in the one period, so that students know that the work carries over and that they can be planning for it in their head. So if they're doing a written piece, they're not expected to finish that under a time restriction. They turn to it the following day.
So I know we want to really appreciate David, Sherry, and Kim. Show them a Bajan appreciation. And we also want to thank you, parents, guardians, friends, for coming out and sharing this evening with us. We are going to be back. They're going to be back in Barbados, hopefully January, February. We have a symposium we're going to be working on. So stay tuned. Keep your ears peeled. And you will be invited to come and attend our workshop or our session. We will extend it to a lot more than just a few t-shirts. So thank you very much. Have a lovely night. And then remember, MRD website, because we're going to have the resources placed there once David sends them to me.